Today, we're going to build a world together from scratch. This is technically a continuation of last week's video, although you don't have to go watch last week's video in order to understand what we're doing. In that video, I break down the 6 different types of worlds that you can build as outlined by the book Design Unbound by Anne Pendleton-Julian and John Seely Brown. These 6 types of worlds are a world design around a concept or philosophical construct, a world based on a system of logic or illogic, a known model that has been changed, using Earth as a model and changing something about that, predicting the future, and creating an original culture or belief system. If you want to know what any of those means, go ahead to last week's video and check out my descriptions because I go way more in depth into what each of those things are. So figuring out which type of world your world is helps you figure out how to go about building it, how to develop strategy or whatnot. The way that I world build largely depends on the type of world I'm building. Fantasy worlds are different from sci-fi worlds, which are different from magic systems and different paranormal systems. All of these are different from dystopian worlds, especially dystopian worlds that try to predict the future or make some kind of social commentary about something that's happening right now. I'm going to make some more specific videos detailing the exact process for each type of world where I build one of these types of world alongside with you. But in this video, I'm just going to create a general world to show you generally what my process for world building is, keeping in mind what I was talking about last week. Okay, so I have this idea. I want to create a world in which magic is real. I don't want it to be like Harry Potter. I don't want it to be like any other magic world that already exists. I want to use magic to demonstrate socioeconomic inequality in the United States. So how do I do that? Well, the first thing that I do is I figure out what kind of world that this is and which category it fits into. This particular world fits into category number 4, which is using Earth as a model and changing something about it. My model of this world is Earth, and the thing that I change about it is that now magic exists. Now it's time to develop my high-level question. I talked about this a little last week, but something that Design Unbound said is that every piece of epic fiction answers an epic high-level what-if question. Like, what if aliens existed and wanted to take over the Earth? Or what if we had the ability to predict crime before it happened? How would those things change the world? In this world, the epic high-level question that I want to answer is, what if magic were real and everyone had the ability to do it? So an Earth in which magic is real is very different from an Earth as it is today. You may be asking yourself, where do I even start? This would change literally everything about the way that the world works. I would start by defining all of the things within my what if question. I'd tackle the big ones first. I'm going to start by determining what magic is. So in my world, magic functions like any other subject in school. People can learn magic just like they can learn math. And there are varying skill levels. As you get better in magic, you're able to cast more complex spells and do more involved enchantments. So what are things that you can do with magic? Well, there are a lot of things you can do with magic. So magic can be functional. The base level of magic is learning how to do things like move things, or light things up, or change things, or transfigure things, help cook things. So the more advanced in magic you get, the more complex and larger the scale of the things you can do with it become. But in order to get more advanced in magic, you need to be able to get more advanced in it in school or wherever you learn magic. I think that it would be in school. If everybody has the ability to learn magic, school is the natural place where you would learn something like that, like math or history, or really math is the right thing to compare it to. So in elementary school or in kindergarten, you start with very introductory magic classes, and as you progress, your classes become more complicated and you can do honors magic or AP magic and more high-level elective courses. Okay, more on this later. So now we have to think about things that usually relate to a magical world. One big thing that usually is in a magical world is some form of magical creature. Some magical creatures, such as dragons and unicorns and goblins, are accepted as normal and exist in the wild. Dragons are rare and they exist mostly in the birch forests of Russia as well as northern China and some parts of North Korea. Basically just the habitat of the Siberian tiger. So dragons are nearly extinct. There are many acts to protect them from poachers and warlords and weird pet people because they've been historically hunted and used as trophies. They are not environmentally protected in North Korea, but there are very few of them left. In the past, they've also been used in the military, but nobody can do that anymore because of the environmental protection and because there are so few in North Korea. They probably have them used as weapons somewhere, but they have not been seen in battle because there have been no recent wars. Anyway, so I would go through all of the magical creatures like this and figure out exactly where they reside, how common they are, how they've been used, how they're perceived, and create kind of an encyclopedia documenting every single creature that I want to include in the book. You need to go deep with it. You basically have to figure out every single difference that you're going to make to the ecosystem and figure out how that introducing these different species like dragons and unicorns are going to change the populations and biodiversity of the world. This can sound really daunting, but the more detailed you can get with it, the better. You're probably not going to include all of this stuff in your book, but if you know it, or at least have a basic idea of it, it's going to make any references that your character makes to dragons or unicorns, etc., much more believable. Okay, so back to the whole school thing. Let's say that this is set in the US, because pretty much every young adult novel seems to be set in the US, and the systems of inequality are still intact, from the gerrymandering to the difference in budgets between school districts. So students in more affluent towns are going to have better access to more high-quality magical education than students that come from lower income districts. Because the students in the richer town districts have access to higher quality and also more advanced magical education, they are going to be able to learn magic at a faster rate than these students in poorer schools, which therefore creates an imbalance in magical education. This imbalance, one might say, can strike some parallels to the inequalities that are present in society today. You can take it to the level of college, for example. Let's say that in order to get into college, you need to display that you have a certain level of magical education in order to take classes at the college. But if your public school in a lower income school district doesn't teach you that high level of magic, or doesn't prepare you well enough to take exams displaying that level of magic, you are going to be at a disadvantage to all the kids in the really wealthy school districts that can hire outside tutors and start at a much younger age in order to get that leg up. So now that we know how magic affects schools, how does it affect other vocations? Well, if everyone knows magic, I figure that it's going to have a pretty big impact on the way that people live their lives. Magic can bleed into the pharmaceutical industry. You can have potions to fix certain ailments that are approved by the FDA and commonly distributed by pharmaceutical companies and doctors to the people who can afford them. Maybe these potions aren't available to everyone. Quote-unquote handmade goods can now be made with things like sewing spells. Trash can be made to magically disappear. So can sewage. Maybe pollution decreases because things can be made to drive or fly without using gas. The introduction of magic into the world will also create new occupations, such as wand makers or broom makers. Are broomsticks used like cars? I don't think so. Maybe they're just used in the bike lane. I touched on this a little before, but how is the food chain gonna change? Which species that we now know and love will become extinct? So if everybody can do magic, magic also needs to be limited. There needs to be some sort of illegal magic, which means that you're gonna also need people who can stop people from using magic to do illegal things, in the form of law enforcement. Maybe some illegal spells are things like killing spells or bringing people back from the dead, if those spells can be done at all. Maybe you need to know a certain level of magic in order to join law enforcement. If someone is using magic to break into a bank or something, you also need to know a little bit of magic in order to be able to stand up to them. Just how powerful can somebody get using magic? Is there a limit to how dangerous somebody could be? What is limiting some individual from becoming the world's best magician and taking over the world? There has to be something stopping them. Medicine and law enforcement and engineering, all of these things would be profoundly changed if magic were incorporated into what they could do. So in order to join these fields, you might need to know a certain number of spells. Maybe you can use magic to do art. You can have artists that create fantastical light shows or displays for people, but maybe that type of magic is really advanced and not everybody can afford to study it because maybe it's expensive, or maybe some people need to spend their time studying other more practical forms of magic, like magic that you can use to get a more practical job. If you catch my drift, there are a lot of opportunities for social commentary around here. So these are the kinds of questions that I start by asking myself, and I need to get as specific as I can with my answers. Every time I answer something, I follow it up with another question that goes even into more detail into that one thing. If I'm building the world for the sake of building the world, I want to be as thorough as possible, because I don't know what my story is going to be yet. But as soon as I know what my story is going to be, I can also do some world building around the story to make sure that every single part of the world I will absolutely need for the story is fleshed out. Something that also should be considered is plot holes. After I published my book in high school, I noticed a lot of plot holes in that book, and it got me really, really scared to build another world because I was so worried that it was going to have plot holes. This is not good. Yes, plot holes are not great, and limiting the number of plot holes you have is always a good thing, but it is impossible to create a world that doesn't have any plot holes. It just doesn't happen. And I'm sorry if you've created the world's best world and your world doesn't have any plot holes, but in my experience, even all the worlds in my favorite books have plot holes and things that they don't explain. I feel like I talk about Harry Potter a lot on this channel, but there are two plot holes in Harry Potter that annoy me so much that every single time I think of plot holes, I just think about these two. The first being the time turner, and the fact that the time turner exists and it doesn't factor into anything else in the story. Just helps Hermione take more classes and save Sirius Black, which is great and everything, but like it doesn't actually help save the world. And then, probably even more frustrating, is the fact that Fred and George had the Marauders map and they didn't notice that Peter Pettigrew slept in the same room as their little brother for as many years as Ron had Scabbers. Like, the first time that they noticed, like, wouldn't that be a little weird? Like, wouldn't they get curious as to who it was that was sleeping in their little brother's bed every night? It grinds my gears. So this is how I would suggest getting started with world building. Start by defining every piece of your what if question and asking yourself as many questions as those pieces until you've created something that makes sense to you. Then, after you have answered every question to the best of your ability, talk to somebody else about your world and tell them about it. This is very helpful because a lot of the times when you're imagining a world and you're answering questions that you posed yourself, you're not thinking of some pretty obvious things that other people may be thinking. Talking to another person about it can be very helpful because they can also point out things that you overlooked and little plot holes that didn't make sense, and that gives you an opportunity to fix them. At the end of the day, the number of plot holes in a world doesn't matter as much as how much the world entertains the reader, but you still need to have a world that makes sense and doesn't take the reader out of your story. Also, think about how magic could affect the government. Figure out what the limitations of magic is. Can magic be used to tell the future? Can magic be used to travel in time? Time travel really messes with stories unless the story is about time travel. I would also recommend, if you're going to start writing a series in a world, start world building way before you start writing the book. Like, give yourself time to think about it and to have everything marinate in your brain. Having a more thought out world before you get started is going to save you so much time in having to go back into your story and fix all of the plot holes and inconsistencies that you wrote before you really knew it was happening in your world. Also, have fun with it. World building is fun. So that's basically it for this video. I just wanted to walk you through my overall process for how I start going about world building. As you get deeper into the world building process, you have to get more specific and the process becomes a little bit more involved, and it's harder to showcase exactly what that's like for me because it comes and goes as I'm working on the book. But that's basically how I get started. I ask myself a ton of questions and try to get as deep as I can and think about it over a long period of time. If you have any questions about the world building process or even want someone to bounce ideas off of, I have my email in the description of this video and along with my social media links, so connect with me, reach out to me. I'd love to hear what you're working on, and I can be another set of ears if you have questions, and I can tell you if anything doesn't make sense. That kind of stuff is super fun for me, so please reach out. And as always, happy writing.